Okay, so, let me add something to color your comments. My perception is that part of the problem is that the administration and the Department of Finance view this as an employer liability, and they expect any solutions to this to come out of employer funds, and yet employers were not the ones that created the liability. That was a decision of the state to extend unemployment insurance benefits repeatedly and to borrow the money from the federal government. So as we're talking about eras where we have budget surpluses, I think it's irresponsible to continue to ignore that liability. And further observation is that, as you said, the penalty is going to continue to go up. So even though that debt is being repaid through the penalty, that penalty is increasing every year. Mm-hmm. And although I've known about this for a few years, my district businesses, this is the first time I've actually heard from them. And I'm betting that most of the people here have heard from them. And I guarantee that next year we will hear from all of them because the penalty will go up. And by 2018, I think it's almost going to double. I think 2019 is when it would double entirely. And that would be a penalty of over $200 per full-time employee for every employer in California. So I'm just going to suggest that it's a discussion I think we ought to have, because politically I think it's going to be untenable to let it go all the way through 2018 without addressing the issue.
And I would acknowledge there are some trade-offs to employers. So to the extent that employers, which this is all, the unemployment insurance program is an insurance program paid solely by employers. To date, the state has actually paid, the general fund, state general fund, has paid over $1.3 billion in interest payments because of the fact that we borrowed, so that all of the Californians that were affected by the recession were able to receive their unemployment insurance benefits without interruption. There was no change or increase in the benefit structure. They were just getting benefits that they were entitled to when they were laid off by the employers. But employers, whether they pay through the credit reduction, which is what they're seeing right now, that increase of $24 per employee, or whether they pay because the taxable wage base and the regular money that flows into the fund is increased, is a trade-off that has to be considered, and certainly would require broad-based cooperation to be able to pass that type of tax increase.
Sure. I understand. I understand it's a philosophical difference and we're not going to resolve it here. But the only thing the state's paying, to be clear, what you said, was the interest on the money that the state borrowed.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mr. McCarty.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. A few questions for Department of Finance on higher education and early ed. So I'll start with higher ed. And the first issue I want to address is enrollment targets. And just kind of a backdrop, we know that since Prop 30, both UC and CSU have had roughly $750 million in increased investments to the system, allowing them to rebuild from the Great Recession. A decade or so ago, we got rid of the enrollment targets for each system. At the community college, we have X amount of dollars for enrollment. At the UC and CSU, maybe for reasons of flexibility, we got rid of those. And just wondered if the Department of Finance could target on the issue of that, and whether there's an appetite to maybe revisit that. As you probably heard this past week, the UC came out and stated that they're not only not growing by the 5,000 students we want them to grow in the next year, but they're actually decreasing enrollment for California kids by roughly 1,600. And so, one of the things that's a little disappointing and kind of frustrating is in the budget process where there's no accountability for us to look at and saying, hey, we give you X and hundreds of millions of dollars in new revenue. We expect this amount of enrollment for, frankly, California families and taxpayers who are counting on access to the higher education segment. So is that something that we can possibly, that you're looking at revisiting? I know it's a priority of ours. Was this something that was in the governor's desire when he had the summer-long conversations in spring with the president of the UC system?
Well, first of all, we continue to be very focused on our higher education systems, and especially in making room for more enrollment by improving the path through the educational institution. Right now, especially in our CSU system, the four-year graduation rates at some of our campuses are very low. And so to the extent that students who do get into college can get through in a shorter period of time, that on the natural is going to make room for additional enrollment into those universities. We've moved away from just a strict enrollment target because I think we feel like our approach at better understanding what happens to the students once they are admitted into the university is an important focus that we all should be looking at in terms of how many years it takes to get through if you're doing everything right and you're sequencing courses and you're still not getting the courses that you need and you end up having to do a 5th year or a 6th year. Those are things that are costing families, students with the increased debt, and also the state through as well. So we've had sort of this multifaceted focus. Certainly enrollment is one component that we care about, and I'll let my colleague Christian Osmena explain a little bit about the UC article, because we all read the same article as well, and I was concerned as well. But we do have the $25 million that's built in to the budget, and we do expect that UC will increase enrollment in the upcoming school year.
And I would just add that the article noted that in 15-16 UC enrollment had declined. I think UC had indicated that it would hold enrollment flat in 15-16, so I think that was concerning to the administration also. But I would just note that it doesn't change the base and the expectation that the administration and the legislature set last year. So the expectation set last year was an additional 5,000 students compared to the number of students enrolled in 14-15. And so the 14-15 base wasn't referenced in the article. The article was about 15-16. So the budget does expect that UC would continue to enroll by 16-17 additional 5,000 students.
Sure. Well, we get that piece, and we'll certainly talk about this year. But I would say that the 1,600 are lost this year. You may regroup and address that a year from now. But this past year, tell that to 1,600 families who wanted to go to the UC. But I guess the bigger issue is that time of degree is a certain piece of the puzzle, and I think we should all be in on that. The UC and CSU. I know specifically the CSU is really focused on that, but. If we want to get to where we need to be in California, having 1 million additional adults with higher education degrees by 2025, which all these reports keep coming out and saying, it seems that we need to have, a predictable number of students in the system. So target enrollment growth seems to be logical. The other issue I want to just pivot to briefly is the other end of the P16 spectrum and early education. As many people interested in this probably have more questions than answers right now on the early education proposal. Frankly, it's exciting that we've been talking about early education. There's a bunch of words in there about the importance of it, so that's a positive right there that you're on the agenda to talk about investing in early ed, knowing that it's really important to address the achievement gap and help address our learners do well in our school system is pre-K. I wanted to ask that, last year in the budget we put roughly $100 million to expand preschool access. The year before, the same, there was the Preschool for All legislation didn't go through. And one of the things the governor noted is that the budget 2 years ago, there was the commitment to expand access in early education to cover all low-income 4-year-olds. So we estimate that there's, 25, 30-something thousand low-income 4-year-olds that don't have access to transitional kindergarten, Head Start, or state preschool. And so I guess the question that is looming that maybe I don't have an answer for today, but I wanted to ask is does this proposal, do you think that it would expand access to the current families of low-income 4-year-olds who don't have a seat in a pre-K program here in California?
Yes, we do, because we would take the transitional kindergarten money that is currently not means tested, and we would really propose that be targeted to low-income or children from low-income families. And so we think that this money will actually go further in serving those students that would otherwise not be going to preschool by allowing school districts to really design a program that fits and meets the needs of their local communities and really get those families and children into the school system and off to a very positive start. Right now, we have a lot of really great programs. They've grown up over decades. They're a bit of a patchwork right now. And so we think this gives a school district an opportunity to provide leadership in this area, to braid these programs together. Of course, the Head Start funding still goes directly from the federal government to the school district, so that wouldn't be have as much flexibility. But by combining the few state streams that we do provide to locals, giving them more opportunities to design a program that meets their local needs.
Sure. And I guess that leads to the second question, and you somewhat addressed it, is that TK, as we know, transitional kindergarten, essentially, if you're 4.9 years of age, for decades, you have had access to public education free in California. And so this would change that whole dynamic. And I guess there's a couple questions, is how is that legal? You can't say, if you're an eighth grader, if you're a low-income eighth grader, you get eighth grade education for free. But if you have money and your parents have money, you have to pay for public education for eighth grade. We don't do that for any other grade. So how do we do that for kindergarten in a system that we've had middle-class families have been able to send their kids to kindergarten? Now it's called TK kindergarten for free for decades. And so that's a looming issue. Maybe you can address that. And I'll throw a second question on there, just you can answer them both.
So we're going to have to try to limit all the questions you're throwing on them at this moment. Just
with that one, just the
because
TK.
I think there are a number of members who want to speak, and we have a 3 o'clock time frame.
Gotcha.
So
just maybe the TK.
A number of your things could be handled in your subcommittee.
The legality, that's the looming question about that.
We are proposing that districts would not have to offer the transitional kindergarten program as we currently know it. That's only for children who are born in 3 months of the year. There was a policy decision in the state to move the school age back from December 5th, I believe, to September 1st. That was based on literature saying that school children do better when they're slightly older in our current kindergarten program. So while those parents of students that do have children born in that 3 months wouldn't be currently benefiting from the program as we know it today, many of those parents are making other choices already for their children. It really has been a patchwork of how the transitional kindergarten program has been implemented across the state. I know here in Sacramento City Unified School District, TK is only offered at a few of the elementary school campuses. The same in LA Unified. San Diego Unified has actually proposed to offer it at every school, but the children are in blended classrooms. So TK, the younger TK children are in with the kinder at those schools. So there's really quite an array of the way school districts have decided to implement the new transitional kindergarten program that's been around for just a few years now. But we are proposing, realizing it's a sizable change to the program, but I do think that over the last several years, parents have already started to adjust to that change in age for the school start date.
Thank you. Mr. Chu?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the presenters for your work on the budget. I'd like to build on the topic of housing that Mr. Mullen first started with a general question. I know we're not here in the legislature the first to ask about the affordable housing crisis we're in, with 500,000 kids who are homeless, with 1.5 million families that lack affordable housing, with the fact that we have the highest poverty rate in the nation when you include housing costs, and with the fact that budget decisions in recent years, as you know, with the elimination of redevelopment and the drying up of Prop 46 and Prop 1C funds has meant we've lost close to $2 billion a year of money that used to invest in affordable housing. Looking through this budget, it doesn't appear there's very much new to help us address this. And I wanted to ask, from the administration standpoint, from your perspective, is there a plan to tackle affordable housing? What sort of ideas are you kicking around, and how can we work together to solve the crisis we're in?
I just want to mention that while the bond funds have been run out, have been spent down, there has been a major new commitment to affordable housing, and that's through the cap and trade program. There's an additional $400 million offered in 2016-17 for the Sustainable Communities Grant Program that funds transit-oriented developments of affordable housing. And over the last several years, combined, about $1 billion has been allocated, will be allocated by the end of 16-17 to that program. So that's one area. Another area is the legislature and the administration recently partnered to repurpose some veterans bonds to target homeless veterans in the amount of $600 million. So that continues to be implemented. But I just want to make the point that housing is something that we've had a lot of internal conversations about. It is a very difficult issue, and it's especially acute in many parts of our state. It is also a very difficult issue for the state to tackle. Housing is very expensive. I believe in the San Francisco Bay Area, units can cost upwards of $500,000 per unit. So it becomes a very difficult issue for the state to tackle in a very large way. It's also important to note that locals, cities, counties are really the primary level of government in charge of planning and siting of new housing developments or infill development in their local jurisdictions. So that's an important point as well. I also want to just note a few other things related to low-income housing. Last year, we were able to implement a program in the CalWorks program for very low-income individuals called Rapid Rehousing. That's a program that's been rolled out in targeted areas of the state to help avoid homelessness of our CalWorks population. The budget also includes a first-time effort of $25 million to help the state and locals site supportive housing facilities for our ex-offender population and also for our mentally ill population as well. These the state is very committed to expanding community beds for our ex-offenders from 220 beds to 680 beds. And while that may not sound like very many, getting those beds sited in communities can be a very large challenge. And so we are offering $25 million to work in partnership with cities and counties to get those facilities sited.
If I could just follow up with just one quick comment, I very much appreciate the numbers that you cited, but just to put things in perspective, we're talking about close to $2 billion a year that we've lost. And I know, for example, with cap and trade funds, as Mr. Mullen and I were just discussing, there was $200 million from last year that were rolled into the $200 million this year, which are desperately needed by our localities. And I know the governor has talked about the $500,000 cost of affordable housing units in San Francisco, which obviously is on the very high end compared to other jurisdictions. The other thing I would point out is there are ways to leverage state dollars that could leverage $12 of private sector capital and federal tax dollars if we were to do it right. So last year the governor had vetoed a bill that was supported by 118 legislators out of 120 with bipartisan support, which would have leveraged literally 12 federal tax dollars and private sector capital to go to localities. And I do hope that we'll be able to have another conversation this year about how we move forward with that.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Given the time, and I know we have a deadline here, I'm just going to make a comment and observation, hoping that perhaps a little bit of what we're concerned about, that the administration would think seriously about it. We have established, apparently, that the proponents of Prop 47 grossly exaggerated the savings. I would submit that they grossly underestimated the cost to people with respect to criminal releases. And we have a set of circumstances, quite frankly, in which the decriminalization of gun theft is remarkable in communities like Fresno and other places in California. We literally have criminals who steal 3 guns in 3 different instances on a given day because they know that the $950 number per incident will get them a misdemeanor. We actually have criminals who, and this was confirmed with my police chief just 2 or 3 days ago, who literally are on the streets with calculators to determine when they steal and what they steal. And so with respect to the decriminalization of this matter, I want to express the concern I think that a lot of people have that the reality here is that while we may very well be saving 20 some odd million dollars, or that we may be reducing the population in a particular prison or jail, the reality is that we are releasing onto our streets increasing numbers of criminals who are calculating the decision with respect to what to steal and when to steal it. And so I would just submit that there really does need to be some accountability and some accounting for the price tag of Prop 47, the price tag of the decriminalization, particularly of gun theft, and to at least recognize that in the administration and recognize that there's a huge cost to communities when crime is increased and when guns are stolen at the level that they are, given that we believe that Prop 47 encourages that kind of behavior rather than sends a signal that it's something that we frown upon. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on that.
I want to encourage us to stay on the subject of the budget, okay, if we can, because I think if we get too far in our many policy issues, we will be here all night, and we only have a few more minutes left. Remember, all of you will have an opportunity to have great conversations in your subcommittees. Great conversations, okay? I want to emphasize that as we go to the next person, who is Mr. Bigelow.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and like the rest, I want to thank both of you for your detail and explanation and how thorough you were prepared to come here today. My questions are going to pertain to the fire protection in the courts area. 2 parts on the courts, and we'll start there. According to the budget summary, trial court funding is proposed to be 10.5% above the 2007-2008 budget. My questions are, and this is 2 parts, is most of this money discretionary for the individual trial courts to use to restore services that have been cut over the last 5 years?
So we have $44 million that I would say is going directly to the trial courts for support of their general operating expenses. $20 million is completely discretionary. The remaining $24 million are for commitments that the state made a few years ago to cover the fluctuation in health benefit and retirement costs as they grow. And also to backfill lost revenues due to declines that have been occurring over time of their fees and penalty revenues that have been used to support the courts. Over the recession, it's true that general fund support for the courts was greatly reduced, but some of that was made up with shifting to increased fees and penalties. But those revenues have been in decline, and the legislature and the governor 2 years ago have made a policy decision to backfill those declines. So that's funded in the budget. There are also some additional targeted investments, $30 million for a court innovation grant program for the trial courts to aid in transitioning and modernizing some of their operations, including rethinking of how individuals interact at a traffic court, improving the ability to pay fees and penalties in a easier manner through technology and other investments to improving the court experience and improving the efficiency of the court program, the courts. There's also a few other investments that I can go into in more detail, but overall we do have $190 million additional general fund dedicated to the courts, including $60 million for deferred maintenance on their facilities.
So it would be fair to say that the governor's proposal of $2.8 billion, probably still with the increase of that 10.5%, isn't going to be enough to cover the real cost of providing levels of service that the Californians deserve?
We think that our proposal continues to make progress in providing equal access to justice across the state. The Chief Justice is in the midst of chairing a large effort in the courts to think about their court business differently and improve and modernize those efforts. And we think that will also significantly improve access to justice as well.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I will say I agree that the court fees is a big thing because too many of those court fees go uncollected, and or they get waived. And that's a big chunk of the missing puzzle, if you will. Thank you for that response. On fire protection, and this is probably more in the weeds for the local committee that we would have, but it needs to be brought out today just because we're facing a fire season, even though we're getting a lot of rain. And the governor's budget denotes that CAL FIRE's current fleet of helicopters is aging and in need of being replaced. In fact, most of those helicopters are of 40 years of age, and they're in desperate need. It's my understanding that the budget is folks are looking at taking the lowest bid. And my concern is with this. That's great, but we're going to get pieces of equipment that aren't going to be able to haul the same amount of gallons that we currently have, or have the same flight times, or fly at the same elevations. So we're getting in a lesser product with that lesser dollar. And we need the best equipment possible for our men and women on the ground fighting those fires. So it's just an editorial. You don't really need to respond to that in the context of here. But maybe you can start looking at that so that we can speed up the results when it gets through our hearings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bigelow. Mr. Thurman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll only ask 30 questions to Ms. Bosser, if that's okay. And you don't have to answer any of them, but just one. Oh, first of all, let me thank you all, both of you, for the presentation, and acknowledge that there is my question is about K-12 education for you or for anyone on your team, and to acknowledge that there is a significant investment here, which I'm deeply appreciative of, especially somebody who was on a local school board in 2008, which was probably the worst time for cuts in our education system. What I couldn't reconcile in the budget is that while there's an increase in how much we're actually putting into the local control funding formula for where we were expected to be based on projections from a few years ago, there's also a decrease in this budget in average daily attendance funding last year and this year. And I want to know what metric do you use, or what assumptions are you making about the impact of local control funding formula that you can also at the same time reduce average daily attendance revenue for districts that need that money, that depend on that money. And from the way we hear it from principals and superintendents, that even with LCFF, they're still struggling to meet many, many obligations. So what's the story of LCFF as you see it, and what impact do you see it making that there could be a determination to provide less average daily attendance revenue to districts?
Sure. This is Jeff Bell from Department of Finance. The local control funding formula is statewide and is 95% funded in the budget that you see before you. About $3 billion more will fully fund it. Average daily attendance varies by district, right? So it goes up and down depending upon the populations in those districts. And statewide, it's going down. So when you're looking at average daily attendance compared to the LCFF we have as a goal to fully fund statewide, and how much resources that we have for it, we're determining by statewide targets for how much we thought we would need for the program as a whole. But you will see results vary district by district. I'm not familiar with the conversations that you had with the district folks that you were talking with, but in some districts, funds are going up based on their populations, and in others it could be going down. We're very happy with the results of the LCFF in that we think it's targeting populations appropriately that need those additional resources, though. So from the administration's perspective, we're quite happy with how the progress is that's being made to date.
It signaled a little bit of an alarm for me, because I'm sure that the LCFF is intended for districts that probably, when you look at the data, historically see lower school attendance. And if they're at the same time seeing less ADA revenue, that means less money in their general fund to address issues like attendance and other academic issues. And so that's why I want to know if, I know that districts are required to do some reporting as part of LCFF, and if they've reported to you that things are better, I would like for us to be able to see that reporting, because it's different from what I've heard from the major districts, certainly in the area that I represent and that I typically hear from education leaders throughout the state.
So yeah, I mean, I just was going to add on that the state has been funding based on average daily attendance for many decades. There are some policy reasons for that, but I think it's important to recognize the struggles, particularly I think in some urban districts, but also in rural districts as well, that have had these steady declines in enrollment. This is even though there's additional monies, there is still going to be a need for those districts to really right-size their program based on their current population. In some cases, that means closing some schools. Those are very difficult conversations and difficult choices, and you don't want to overstate that or understate that. But the state LCFF did not change the way the state funds in terms of ADA. That is something that continues, and it is something that local school districts do have to manage through. A very important point to note, though, that per pupil Proposition 98 funding is up over 3,500 since 2011-12. This per pupil amount that's a really big big increase over a short period of time, and we think that is helping, but it's not solving all ails. Many urban school districts and rural school districts that have been in these steady declines.
Well, I'll end there and wait till a future meeting to see what metrics you're using to define the impact of the LCFF. Thank you. Just on that last note, with the increases, where does that put us in per pupil spending in relation to other states?
It puts us probably in the lower third, I'd say.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Williams.
Well, as a member of the Budget Committee and as Chair of Natural Resources, I think it's part of my job to look at your cap and trade plan. And I wanted to say one thing that I thought was immensely important, which is the substantial investments that are made in here in conversion technology, waste reduction, and biofuel facility investments, all of which would be really necessary to meet the goals in the short-lived climate pollutants plan, and of course more may be necessary to meet those goals, including what we do in low-carbon fuels and elsewhere. So I want to first of all say as a compliment, I think what would be useful is understanding the continuity of how that would be used because the interplay between waste reduction in reducing methane, but then the production from there usually is production of a biofuel, natural gas, and how to promulgate that as an alternative fuel source to help your 50% reduction, I think is an important thing for us to look at those four different pots and see how they interplay with each other. And then maybe the only thing on here that I really kind of that looked a little funky is the $100 million for Caltrans for low carbon road program. Can you walk me through how funds for Caltrans, which usually get spent on road repair, are supposed to reduce carbon emissions?
So the proposal, which is part of our overall transportation funding package, which includes $500 million from the cap and trade program, $400 million would be for transit, and then the $100 million that you're referring to is for our Complete Streets program. And so the idea here is that when you are making communities more walkable, bikeable, you're getting people out of their cars. They are not driving as much, and they're reducing greenhouse gas emissions in that way. So we think those components to improving our transportation system are an important component, and they've been part of our transportation funding package since last year. The roads are inevitably how most Californians get around, and changing that culture will be difficult, but it's really important that we work at that, because reducing GHG from our transportation sector is a very important component.
Well, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be spending on road repair. I'm a believer in updating our infrastructure, just trying to keep funds that legally are required to reduce carbon emissions focused on that. But I think I'm pretty familiar with Complete Streets. So that's the program where there is sidewalk building alongside road building. And that's a current program, and you have a current funding level. So would this be a $100 million increase in the Complete Streets program, or would you be reducing general other funds that are going into Complete Streets and substituting GHG funds?
So Complete Streets would be just one component, and I'll have my colleague Matt Almy go through some of the other eligible uses, but Complete Streets is one of the components.
That's right. Matt Almy, Department of Finance, is, as Ms. Bosler mentioned, the focus of this program is for projects that have demonstrable GHG reduction benefits. So just to underscore your point, there's a lot of existing belts and suspenders under law that requires that all monies used by cap and trade demonstrate that they reduce GHG emissions. So that's like the clear legal threshold for the use of these funds. And so potentially eligible projects, this would be a competitive program, but projects eligible for funding of this program would include the Complete Streets projects that Ms. Bosler mentioned, roundabouts that replace stop-controlled intersections, optimization of traffic signals, safety improvements to roads that improve safety for pedestrians and bicyclists, that increase active transportation. So those types of projects that we can have a 100% level of certainty reduce GHGs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. There's one thing I just want to bring to everybody's attention and see if we could look at allocating some money to mobile field hospitals. They're an investment that the state made several years ago. Currently, the state has 3 mobile field hospitals, but unfortunately, because of budget issues, they have not been fully functionable. Each hospital has the ability to treat 200 patients. So the whole purpose of having these mobile field hospitals were to specifically put them in 3 different parts of the state, have them ready and available. As obviously, we see what happens here in the state. Unfortunately, with the fires and floods and earthquakes, that there will be a very useful tool to help us in that were to arise. So I know 2 years ago I looked at putting some money aside on the assembly side, helped me, but unfortunately the final budget took that money out. So I'd like to see how we can look to put that money back in, roughly about $2 million, get these mobile field hospitals up and ready and strategically placed in 3 different parts of the state. Currently, they're warehoused here near Sacramento, and unfortunately, it's sad to see these fully functional mobile field hospitals. They're fully maintained and equipped. Like I said, they have their own surgical suite, pharmacy, cafeteria, everything up and ready to go, but unfortunately because of budget issues, they're not being properly equipped and put. So I'd like to put it out there that hopefully we can look at that, because obviously, once again, being in California, we really have a lot of issues when it comes to natural disasters.
Yes, we do not have any money for the mobile field hospitals. We do, though, have very robust planning for emergency response led by our Governor's Office of Emergency Services, working directly with counties and locals on the ground. We have some real experience this past fall in 2 rural counties, Lake and Calaveras County, where the plans that we put in place were called into action. Many members of the administration were a part of those response teams during that emergency, and while we didn't have those hospitals, we think that the work that we did through our response and coordinated response with the local counties and also with neighboring counties through mutual aid worked very well. So we are happy to provide cost estimates for you on that option of the mobile field hospitals, but we don't have anything in the budget for that this year.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kim.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question related to K through 12 education. As you know, in 2012, we passed Prop 30, which was meant to be a temporary fix to prevent education cuts. Now that it's nearing its end of Prop 30, there is a much talk or real push to extend Prop 30. So related to that, I want to ask you if you can speak to your forecast for Prop 98. As Prop 30 tax revenues expired, funding for schools under Prop 98, it's my understanding, will continue to increase. Is that correct? So if Prop 30 revenues go away, schools will not experience any funding cliff, as there is a concern and much talk of it. So would you speak to that, please?
So our multi-year for Proposition 98, it does go up to through the end of the taxes, but then it does actually in the first year after the taxes expire, 2018-19, would then go down slightly in terms of the general fund portion of that.
Continuing, the overall would go up slightly on a regular basis. It doesn't grow at the by leaps and bounds, but it does grow on a continuing level into the out years. But the forecast does not build in Prop 30 revenues.
Would LAO continue and probably give us your perspective on this, please?
Yes, I think Mr. Bell's the latter comments are helpful in that assuming the economy continues to grow through 1920, and that's a big assumption, but if it does, we have continued growth in the overall guarantee, but clearly it does slow down because your revenues are stepping down as both the sales tax goes off over a 2-year period and then your personal income taxes go off over a 2-year period. So it ramps down rather slowly. So you get slow growth, but the overall guarantee, if the economy continues to grow, would still grow.
Yes, and the numbers I referenced at the beginning were the general fund numbers only, and so there's a combination of general fund and local property tax as well. So really dependent on what continues to happen with the economy in terms of whether it continues to grow or flattens or goes down.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank the Ms. Bosler and Mr. Taylor for being here, and all of the staff from the Finance Office and the LAO who are here also to answer questions. As we pointed out at the beginning, this is the beginning of the conversation with regards to the budget. I want to emphasize to my members to understand that the governor's budget is a recommendation to us. It is not the budget. It is a recommendation to us. And I think Mr. Taylor kind of emphasized that consistently, that he has made his best proposal about how he thinks we should expend resources. We then have the responsibility to actually craft the budget. And I want to emphasize that because I kept hearing people ask permission to put things in. You're asking yourself, in essence, to put things into the budget. And that comes as a result of subcommittee work and collaboration with your colleagues as well as with the staff and the consultants for the committee. We have a responsibility, obviously, to be responsible, to have our priorities straight with regards to how we fund, what we fund, our responsibilities to the people of California to ensure that we have a balanced budget, but also a budget that has some future to it with regards to investing in the human potential of California, investing in the things that we know will grow and stabilize California's economy, and responding to the needs that are out there for us. But remember, the governor's budget is a recommendation to us. We are the people who actually make the budget. The governor cannot make a budget. He can respond to a budget. He can sign the budget. He can veto the budget, but he can't write the budget. He can only make a recommendation. So I want to emphasize that as I hear your comments today, that we have a unique responsibility in a very unique time to really put California in very solid foundation as we have over the past few years, making investments in a reserve that we think will hopefully stabilize us in difficult times, but also to respond to many of the needs that we have over the last 3 or 4 years attempted to slowly but surely to address. So once again, thanks to our finance office, to our LAO for the information. As they say, the games begin. Now it's time for us to get to work and to craft a budget. Thank you so very much, and meeting is adjourned.